He's a nationally certified psychologist focusing his work on children, especially those of color, in the public school systems. And through his advocacy for these children, he's joined the ranks of many who came before him, including his blood relative, Frederick Douglass, as one of America's Black leaders. Welcome to the show, Dr. Umar Johnson. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be on the show, and peace and blessings to Memphis and your listening audience.
Thanks so much. Now, you're a blood relative of Frederick Douglass. Tell me how that knowledge came about.
Yes, ma'am. I'm related to Frederick Douglass by virtue of my 4 times great-grandfather, Stephen Henry Bailey, who was Frederick's half-brother by virtue of slave master rape and first cousin, because their mothers were sisters. If you've ever read any of Frederick's 3 autobiographies, he talks about growing up on Tuckahoe Creek as a child under his grandma Betsy's care alongside his cousin Stephen. Well, cousin Stephen is Stephen Henry Bailey, Umar Johnson's 4 times great-grandfather.
That's spectacular. So do you think that had an impact on your career or what you perceive your responsibility to be to the community?
Yes, it has definitely had an impact on me. When I found out I was related to Frederick Douglass, I was at a family reunion with my father in Baltimore, Maryland. We were at a church where I noticed a lot of Frederick Douglass memorabilia. I asked my father what was all of this Frederick Douglass information being here for. And he told me, you're related to him. And that blew my mind because I had a Black history class in 4th and 5th grade at Meade Elementary in North Philadelphia, where Miss Vivian Green, the teacher, really hammered into us knowing who we were and loving who we were. And I instantaneously fell in love with that class. And then to follow that up with a family reunion the very next year, because I would no longer get Black history class after the 5th grade, unfortunately, finding out after that in the 6th grade that I was related to Frederick Douglass really gave me a sense of honor, pride, but most of all, obligation. My relation to Frederick Douglass is more of obligation than it is of pride or any sort of fleeting arrogance. Being related to someone like that for what he has done really motivates me to keep on going. That really is the impetus that gives meaning to my work.
Now, tell me what led you out of the schools as a school psychologist into the public sphere as a speaker.
It came by accident. It came by accident when I graduated from Millersville University in Pennsylvania. I graduated in 97, undergraduate, and I joined the Philadelphia division of Marcus Garvey's organization, Division 121.
I almost want to pause right there and find out what led to that.
Well, I was always a revolutionary. I was always an organizer, always a radical at heart, always conscious before I even knew what Black consciousness was all about. So me coming into the Garvey movement was a natural procession from Black history class, from finding out I was related to Frederick Douglass, from my student activism at college. So it was a natural procession. I don't believe there's any coincidence. And the Marcus Garvey movement in Philadelphia was located on Cecil B. Moore Avenue, which is the main thoroughfare for those of us who lived in North Central Philadelphia. In other words, it was right in the middle of my neighborhood, right next door to the store where my mother would buy my footwear. So I think it was meant for me to join the Garvey movement and become a Garveyite. And so when I joined, I was one of the youngest members there, and they would often ask me, the elders that is, to stand up and speak about what it was I did as a school psychologist, because most people never heard of a school psychologist. And I was sort of an anomaly there. And so I would stand up and I would talk. I was an anomaly as a professional, as a school psychologist at my age of about 23 when I came out of undergrad.
Wow.
25 when I came out of graduate school at 25. And so I would stand up and I would talk, and people would come to the meetings, and I started getting requests.
Wow. So, you took us behind the curtain, so to speak, with regard to how children of color interact with special education programs in the school system. What backlash, if any, did you experience as a result of this information?
Blessing. Okay. With the school district as being somewhat of a maverick, a radical school psychologist, someone I fell into ill repute. Many of the principals, none of them wanted me as their school psychologist because they knew that if I was evaluating their students, they were not going into special education unless they required it. And so they didn't like that. Principals, and keep in mind, most of these are Black principals. These are Black people drafting our kids and throwing them in special education with no concern. And they didn't want me because they saw me as kryptonite. They said, if we get him, that boy who we're trying to get out of the class, we'll never get him out because Dr. Johnson, and I wasn't doctor, and Mr. Johnson is not going to qualify them for special ed if he doesn't see clear evidence of a learning disability.
Now, was there a financial incentive to them funneling those children into special education?
Without question. Special ed is all about the money. Special education, you have to understand Jim Crow in the schools because special education is based on maintaining Jim Crow in public education. Whenever a child goes into special education, the school gets paid. I need your listening audience to understand this. This also helps explain why so many African American children go into special education and they never get out of special education, because to exit your child from special education means that the money train also stops.
You've spoken out also about children being in special education classes all day, like they go from this.
That a special ed child is only supposed to be educated in the special ed setting to the extent necessary in order to make academic progress. In other words, if your son has a reading disability, he should only be in special ed for what class?
Reading.
Your daughter has a math disability, she should only be in special ed for what class?
Math.
But if we go through Memphis public schools, if we go through Tennessee, we will find that the black children are in special education all day long. How do you justify that? You can't. But it happens because special ed was designed to segregate the black children. And because our parents don't know the law, most black special ed parents don't even know about the least restrictive environment clause within the special ed code. They don't even know that your child should only be in special ed for those subjects for which they were identified to have a disability. You can only be in special ed during the subject time, or should I say, to receive help in the subject area for which you were identified to have a disability. But our kids go in there all day. It's called special ed abuse, academic apartheid, schoolhouse Jim Crow, and it's going to continue until black parents do something about it. And that's why in Memphis on the 14th, we will be signing parents up for the National Independent Black Parent Association Memphis, Tennessee chapter. And we also hope that parents come down from Chattanooga and Knoxville and Nashville and points beyond and even other states, because we need these chapters everywhere. We're going to focus on the 7 key areas in these chapters of special education, school discipline, school finance, school policy, social support for our mothers and single fathers, homeschooling, and parent advocacy. Those will be the 7 core areas of each chapter. And if anyone is interested in Tennessee of starting a chapter of this new organization, 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock for my power lecture and conversation on the miseducation of black children.
As soon as you came onto the scene, it was like this proliferation of Dr. Umar Johnson everywhere. Has there ever been a point that you struggled with that fame, that attention, the obligation of that?
Okay, repeat that. Was there ever a point where I struggled with?
Yeah, just the attention, the that fame, because that wasn't something that you sought out to do. Like you said, it just kind of fell into your lap.
It hit me, and it caught me blindsided, because going back to my earlier comment about 2010 being the launching pad, the launching year for the Dr. Umar era, for lack of a better word, I was not prepared for it. In 2011, it was like literally I was going from interview to interview. Everyone wanted to know, who is this guy, this school psychologist, this Garveyite, this educator who's saying things we've never heard before, and so everybody wanted a piece of me. I was literally falling asleep on the phone with him. Literally, I remember about 2 or 3 interviews, I fell asleep because the interview was, say, from like 9 to 11, and they said, hey, can you stay another hour because we have so many callers who want to hear from you. And the next thing you know, I'm waking up with the phone on my ear. But it was beautiful. I loved it, though, because it gave me an opportunity to get the information out. See, one thing about education and mental health, the knowledge is the power. Mm-hmm. In other words, a parent will come to the lecture, and they'll be able to take that piece of information and go right to their child's school the next day and use it. I've received hundreds of testimonials, and I say this not from a place of arrogance, but from a place of humility. I've received hundreds of testimonials from parents, and I get them all the time. Email, say, We took the information, we read your book, and it worked. And to me, that is the encouragement, because the work does get hard. It does get hard. There are people out there who want to destroy you.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them look just like me. Crabs in a barrel, Willie Lynch, self-hate. And it does hurt.
Yeah.
It gets to you. It does get to you, because you're like, my God, I'm out here every day fighting, doing the best that I can.
One thing that I've noticed about you is this isn't information that you keep to yourself so that you're the only expert doing it. You keep trying to empower other people to become advocates for themselves and others.
Yes, ma'am. And let me tell you where that comes from.
Mm-hmm.
I study black leadership. You have to. And I study it for the good and for the bad. And one of the things I've learned about us as black men in particular, because of the racism and the castration of the black male's ego in American society, when we ever get into a position of power, we want to dominate that position. We want to be a dictator. If you look at most black organizations, they are run as dictatorships. There is a leader, and it is his word that is law, and no one else has an opinion. Don't get me wrong. I understand the need for the leader to make the final decision because he was chosen. But that leader needs to also take into account what the people have to say and feel. You don't see that a lot in black organizations. And that's because the black male's ego is a very bruised ego. Mm-hmm. It is a very insecure ego. It is a very weak ego. So whenever we get into a position of leadership, we cannot tolerate dissenting voices. We cannot accept dissenting opinions because we consider it an attack on our ego. So the black male's ego is traumatized. The black male has a traumatized ego. And so what happens when we get into leadership, we often end up leading to protect our ego. We end up leading to protect our ego, not to help the people. And if you are servicing your ego, you cannot service the people at the same time, because the people may need another leader. That's right. If you're serving the people, you will have to say, you know what? He can do this better than me, or she can do this better than me. And even if I'm not replaced as the leader, I may have to replace some of the people in my inner circle to more efficiently carry out my job. But if I'm committed to ego, I'm going to keep the same people there, because these are the people who continue to embellish my ego. That person over there is not necessarily a Dr. Umar supporter, but guess what? They're excellent for what I need them for. So I need to bring them in. But if I'm not loyal to the people and I'm loyal to the ego, I would never bring them in. And I believe that black people's progress has been stifled as much by the black male's ego as has been by racism.
Do you believe in callings? Do you believe there's a such thing as a life calling?
I do. I was raised Muslim, and I learned a lot of good things from the religion of Islam. I would say that Islam was my foundation. But Ifa is my elevation. Ifa is the spiritual system practiced by the Yoruba of Nigeria. And in that system, it's believed that we choose our destiny before we come to this world. And our destiny is already laid out before us. However, Ifa does not endorse the Western concept of fate. There's not a hard fate. There is a soft fate. And what I mean by that is you have your destiny that you chose, endorsed by the Almighty, supported by your ancestors. But guess what? You can spoil your destiny. You can sabotage your destiny with the decisions you make in your life. So, for example, Dr. Umar Johnson, I may have chosen to build the Fred Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy and put them all over the world. That may have been the destiny that I chose. Endorsed by the Creator, supported by the ancestors. But if I make wrong decisions, my selection of a wife, the selection of the company that I keep, other decisions that I make on a daily basis, I can ultimately get off the path of my destiny, and the school that I was destined to build never gets built. So in African spirituality, it's not hard fate, it's soft fate, because your decisions can take you off the path of achieving your destiny.
Have you thought about what you want your legacy to be? Or is that something you give thought to?
Not really. And the reason I don't think about the legacy too often, because as you know, when our leaders die, when our ancestors die, they are not around to defend what others are going to say about them. Isn't it amazing that of the hundreds of books written on Marcus Garvey, Dr. King, Frederick Douglass, Malcolm X, Ida B. Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer, Harriet Tubman, hundreds of books. And almost none of those books were written by people who ever knew them. Look at that. So I say that to say that we have no control over how our legacy will be interpreted or written. History is what happened. Historiography is what people say actually happened. It bothers me that when people look at Dr. King's legacy, they bring up the infidelity. It bothers me. Here's a man who got his brains blown out for you. And all you can talk about is he cheated on his wife. Malcolm X, here's a man who got assassinated in front of his own children. And all you can talk about is how he used to be a pimp when he was a teenager. I mean, we remember the worst of our great people, and it'll be no different for me. My work won't be remembered, but the fact that I didn't marry until late or didn't marry at all, or that I had 2 daughters out of wedlock, or whatever the case may be. I have no control over how my works will be interpreted, so I don't really pay any attention to the legacy. I just try to do the best I can with the time that I have.
Dr. Umar Johnson, a doctor of clinical psychology, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Queen. It's been an honor.